Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for coming down. I think we'll probably have a few more trickling in. If anybody does not have the budget documents, raise your hand. I'll get these to you, but I think most of you guys were there last week. Here you go. So tonight we're doing a mock budget, and we're going to start off with an informational presentation first. Jessica Miller, Jessica, what is your title?
Website and Digital Engagement Administrator.
Oh, there we go. Jessica is going to first talk through your tax bill, your property tax bill. Before I ran for office, I would look at it and just pay the amount on the tax bill, because that's what you do. And now, I don't know that I could answer all questions about my tax bill, but I certainly know a lot more. And there's a lot of information in there. So she's going to talk through that. Dale Bickle is our CAO for the city. He's then going to talk about property tax policy, basically. What tools we have, what tools we don't have, how that impacts the revenue that we receive as a city to pay for these services. So he's going to talk through that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about your mock budget exercise, and I will give you your final revenue numbers, because there have been some changes, which is not uncommon. We have projected revenue numbers, but guess what? It's different. That's kind of how it works here at the city, because we get our final numbers in August as we're trying to finalize everything. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and have you start. Okay? And if you have questions, we're going to hopefully, within about a half an hour, switch to our presentation. If you have clarifying questions during, just raise your hand, okay? And Dale, did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to thank you for the introduction, Gwen. I just wanted to thank you all for being here and your interest in learning more about your local government. I just wanted to say a little bit about Jessica and I's roles in the city. So I'm, Dale Bickle, I'm the Chief Administrative Officer. That title is a little bit unusual. It is an industry title, but I think the best way to describe it is I'm the Chief of Staff for the Mayor. We have a strong mayor form of government, and the mayor is the Chief Executive of the city, and you could think of me as the Chief of Staff related to that. So I oversee all of the departments and help the mayor administer the city. Now, Jessica has this strange title as a Website and Digital Engagement Administrator, and we're here to talk to you about taxes and budget. So what Jessica's real job is to take a complex situation like property taxes and be able to explain it to the public in a way, and she's great with charts and understanding and explaining that. So that's how that's connection made. Jessica is part of the mayor's office staff, and that's how that works. And I'm glad to see all you here for talking about taxes and budgeting. Talking with our other department heads, and the fire chief, he gets to show you a bunch of toys and all this cool stuff. And now Gwen says, "Hey, you need to come in here and talk about taxes." I'm like, "Well, great, thanks so much." So we'll try to make it interesting. Jessica's really going to walk you through the mechanics and how and where the money goes, and I'm going to talk more about tax policy and how we compare to not only other cities in Montana, but nationally. So with that, I think Jessica's going to kick us off.
Alrighty. First of all, did everybody get one of these? I feel like I printed the right number, but
I need one.
Okay, a couple more missing out there. All right, thanks, Gwen. So that is just a sample tax bill. I have another handout that I'll give to you when we're done talking and when you're no longer trying to balance your pizza, along with everything else. So we'll go ahead and get going. And the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through what that tax bill actually looks like here. And I'm going to run this because I realize I've got some fun little animations and stuff in it too. So the first thing we have here on the very top of your tax bill, that top portion is based, all of those things in that very top portion of the tax bill are the things that are based on the taxable value of the property, which is something that is set by the state every 2 years. And we'll get into that a little bit further on. Let me back up just a minute here. For those of you who are property owners, you receive one of these in the mail every year. For those of you who are renters, you can go and look up your property address online, and all of that information is going to be in the other handout that I'll give you when we're done with greasy pizza fingers. So everybody can look up this information, and everything in that top portion is based on the taxable value of your property, which is set by state law and based on various factors in state law, based on the market value of your property, and then it translates to a taxable value. And each jurisdiction breaks down, assigns their own taxes in there. You'll see that top portion is broken down into city, county, local schools, state schools in that section.
Are the appraisers for Missoula only?
Pardon?
The appraisers that do the property evaluations, are they just Missoula?
That's a good question.
Do they go around?
The Department of Revenue office here in Missoula has a region that encompasses much of western Montana, but they're based here.
Where do they pull their information?
Where do they pull it from?
Yeah.
They have all the comparables from, I think, all the sales data. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
it's not just like an MOR database. They have, I think, everything.
Yeah, so they do get the information when a property closes. That isn't public information for purposes of the public. You can't, when you go to see property records at the clerk and recorder's office, you don't see the value necessarily of the property change hands. But Department of Revenue does get that
But
information.
you have to report it when you purchase it.
Right, and that's where that information goes.
And that information is not public. If you were to, try to file an appeal on your appraised value of your property, you would be able to see the comparables for your property, but you also have to sign like a non-disclosure agreement because that still needs to be confidential. Yeah. Yeah. And so this portion of the bill up at the top, you can see that also translates down here into that District 1.1 section down in the bottom on mine. Depending on exactly where your home is located, you may be in a different district, depending on, for example, if you're in the Hellgate School District instead of MCPS, there would be some differences there. But that top portion of the tax bill is brought down and summarized in there into a number of mills. This next little portion here in the special assessments, that's where you'll see things like the City Road and Park District. The City General Fund was in the top portion. Here's the City Road and Park District. We have special improvement districts, and so if you had a sewer project or a sidewalk project that you were also paying for, that would show up in that area. You'll also see our open space bonds, bonds such as open space, and flat dollar amounts for things like the water quality district. So some of these things, like the City Road and Park District, those are also based on the value of your home, but then the soil and water quality districts are a flat dollar amount for regardless of your lot size or the value of your home or any of those factors. That's the same for each single family residence in Missoula. Down here at the bottom of the bill, this is where we have the taxable value and the market value. Those are determined by the state. So the market value is the fair market value of the house, and that is under state law. You'll find, for example, as we're talking about market value, if you were to look up your property on Zillow Estate, for example, Zillow Estate is a property management company. If you were to look up your property on Zillow, that is probably not what your actual appraised market value is going to be on your tax bill. There is a little bit of a lag there, but that is set by the state, and then they set a multiplier for each type of property. So residential is a particular multiplier that is a certain taxable value, commercial is a different one, forestry, etc.
Just curious, why is that?
Probably a lot of legislative reasons that I'm sure that you could watch several hours worth of
What's the meat and
revenue
potatoes?
bills.
Because I know I was talking to Nugent, there you go, Ted. No, I was talking to him about that last week, because I feel like commercial is priced at the rate it is, and residential is much lower.
It is hard to say. It's I don't know.
Are you talking about the assessed value or the taxable
I'm talking
value?
about the taxable value on the commercial side is much more reflective of the actual market value versus commercial is much lower. I would buy this house right now for 315, 317, because it's probably worth 5 at least. You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
that's my
it's-
question is why is it that business has to pay more in order? Why is that?
When it comes to the appraisals, it's very hard to kind of see behind the curtain in the Department of Revenue. That's all stuff that
Why is
happens
it
at the state revenue, or at the state level. So, I don't
How
know.
do you qualify that?
I don't know if Dale can break into that one a little
When the
bit.
state does a state government academy, you can ask that. I went to the other two.
Yeah, I would too, because I feel like it does affect businesses as a whole, maybe more than residential people. Because I know I've done 2 Form 26s to counteract the property value, but it just goes up the next year. You
Yes,
know, we
go
see
ahead.
increases of 14%, 20% in 2 years. I've seen those increases.
For mixed use, or if there's commercial and then residential, are those individually applied, those multipliers to the commercial separately from the residential? And are they treated as different units, or is it still one property? Or is that just dependent on the ownership?
For the most part, a mixed use development is valued at the predominant use. So if it's ground floor retail and residential, the entire building was valued at retail, at residential and taxed that way.
Interesting. Thank you.
So what happens is this bottom portion here of that tax bill that's highlighted in orange, that is a part that we here at the city have nothing to do with. So all of those questions are great questions for the folks who are over in Helena right now. So all of that stuff is set at the state level under state law, and a lot of it plays into what you end up paying your taxes on here. As we come up here, again, the stuff in the top portion of the tax bill is based on that taxable value that is set by the state. And so the city will levy a specific number of mills, levy a specific number of mills, and the school district will levy their mills, and the county will levy their mills, and then there's a certain number of state mills as well. That's multiplied by the taxable value and then divided by 1,000, because that's how we like to do things in government, extra math whenever possible. And then that comes up with the actual amount for your district that you see in those areas that are highlighted. Yes, sir.
I don't pay property taxes. What are mills?
So mills, I can't ever define it. Dale, do you want to take that one? It's sort of a random government thing.
On a gas price, the little lines on a gas price, that's a mill. There
So
are
1,000
It's
Yeah,
a 1,000.
I mean,
So
it's
mill
just-
is
it's 1,000.
It's a
That's where
percentage.
Right,
divided by
It's the
1,000,
tax rate,
so it's
yeah.
the one.
Right, divided by 1,000.
Thousands
Yes.
of your taxable value will be increased
right,
for this specific purpose.
yeah.
Thank you.
So we're just levying, a specific number. And so that's how we get to all these numbers on your tax bill here. So the state plays a role in valuing the property, and then your local government jurisdictions, the city, the schools, and the county all play a role in levying a specific number of mills to get to your total tax bill. And then there are some state mills in here as well. If you look at that top portion, you'll see state school equalization and state college as well. I didn't keep one of those for myself, so I can't see the exact word.
on that one,
Sure.
what's an example of personal property?
Personal property?
The bottom little thing, it has 3
Oh,
real estate.
So personal property would be, I think it's mobile home not on a foundation. So I think that is what counts under that specific one. Okay, so how do they come up with the value of your property? So again, a lot of this happens kind of behind the curtain in Helena. They do have a giant manual that dictates all of that stuff. They do have a process that people can go through to do appeals. What they do is they do this every 2 years. They revalue their residential properties. Agriculture and forest land and other classes of properties have a different schedule. But right now, residential and commercial properties are reevaluated every 2 years. 2023 is a reappraisal year. And so property owners will be getting this. And again, if you're a renter, there's going to be a link on here of where you can go and look that up when these get sent out. So typically they get sent out in June. And again, they'll come from the state. And property owners have 30 days to review this and appeal it. You can see here they'll have the previous assessed value from the previous year, and they'll have the current assessed value. Now the current assessed value, you're receiving this in June 2023. That value will actually be as of January 2022, because it takes a while to get through this whole process and the paperwork and all of that. And then what they do is they take that prior year millage rate, and you see those mills on that previous slide that we had, there were 901 mills. So they'll say, based on that millage rate, we estimate that this would be your new property tax number. So that is not going to be 100% accurate, because we had those other portions on the tax bill that weren't based on the property tax value, but this gives you kind of a rough number. And again, you'll see, the current assessed value is maybe not necessarily what, and this obviously is an older bill. I just put new numbers on the one that they had on the website from our previous reevaluation cycle, because they don't have the new one up yet. So obviously this isn't that, but if you were to look at the value of the property as of January 2022, is that what it should be or not? And then there's an appeals process, and again, that information is going to be in the handout as well. Okay. So where do your property taxes go on there? You'll see on the tax bill, we have about 32% in this year's tax bill, and the ones that were sent out in October 2022. About 32% of that tax bill went to the city. Special districts such as Mountain Line and Water Quality District had about 6.2%. County was 22%. And then schools, local and state together, come to just under 40%, so local schools are about 29%, and then those state schools with that university millage and the state equalization mill is about 10. Now, what does the city do with your taxes when we get it? You'll see here we have a lot of functions in the city. These aren't necessarily departments and organized in a department hierarchy. These are just the functions that we perform. All of these things that have a green box, that's that general fund portion of the taxes. So that very first line on the blue part in the tax bill there, where it just says city general fund, all of these that are in green receive some of that money. The park district, which is one of those that was in the lower down portion on the tax bill, that goes into the blue ones here, the Parks and Recreation, and the Fort Missoula Regional Park Operations and Maintenance is what O&M stands for there. And then the road district in orange was another portion down on that bottom there, and that goes to maintaining our streets and our roads. So that's all of these functions are what your city taxes go to. And then all of these gray things are other things that the city does that are not based on taxes. So your stormwater bill and your sewer bill, and those things are all based on just the utility fees. Our building department is paid for by the building permits that people pull, and Missoula Redevelopment Agency has dedicated funding, and parking, for example, as well as dedicated funding. Okay, so our assessments and expenditures, or tax and assessment expenditures. So of the things that were on this side in a color other than gray, this is how we spend it. So police and fire, you can see those emergency services take up the largest portion of our bill. We do spend a lot on parks and recreation and open space because that's why many of us live here. Community planning, development, and innovation, municipal court and city attorney, public works, mobility, and infrastructure, and that's not just the streets, but then many of the other portions where we're doing our transportation planning and things like that. And then this mayor, council, and administrative services seems like kind of a big category. The administrative services includes everything from our finance department to our HR department, information technology, so all of our computers and all of that system, And it also includes some of our non-departmental expenses that are not actually allocated to the other departments. So for example, our health insurance is all included in that category instead of like being distributed among the police and the fire categories as well. And I think,
Yeah.
so that category looks a little bit larger than it really is, but it's all the back-end infrastructure of the city, as well as many of the things that, if we allocated them correctly, would actually be heavily skewed toward police and fire.
What is the percentage of your health care for the city? What is the percentage
of
of
that
cost for the city?
budget?
I mean, so if you break it down into percentages, is it 5% for each department? Or I mean, is it 5% of the city's budget? So you could, how do you make it, when you're doing a P&L, how can you make it reflective of what it's costing the police if you don't include their health insurance?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the that's a hard question to answer because we don't have a breakdown of it by department, and a lot of the general fund aspects of it in particular aren't allocated out because it's all the same pot. So that's why it tends to using that methodology in a forum like this, it tends to overstate our administrative expenses rather than
Sure.
yeah.
So you don't know what your cost of goods are for.
Yeah, so it's hard for me to say what percentage of the police budget would be health insurance. I don't.
Well, what is the city's percentage as a whole?
Of total, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the total, so personnel costs represent about 70% of the budget. And then our health insurance costs are probably roughly 25% of the total personnel costs.
Okay, and as far as revenues for our general fund, the biggest portion of those revenues come from taxes and assessments, which is what you have on the bill there. We do also collect some money in the general fund for licenses and permits. We get some money from state entitlement, and so that's money that the state doles out to various cities as they've, given us additional duties over time. They've given us not equivalent money to make up for those, but some portion of money. We do have some charges for services that fall into this category instead of being dedicated to things like the sewer and water fund, and some small amounts of fines and forfeitures and miscellaneous there.
What is intergovernmental? Is that in the department?
Yeah.
In this one, that's grants.
So the federal government.
Yeah, federal and state grants would be in that intergovernmental. Yeah.
I don't know if this is a question for you all, but in the example budgeting, there was a line item for contributions. I'll ask that later. Sorry.
Okay. Our budget process, we actually started around April. So City Council will adopt the strategic plan. You'll see that coming up at some time next month. There will be a meeting and they'll discuss the city's strategic plan and our strategic goals. That will inform our budget priorities. They adopt a new strategic plan. The plan usually goes out about 3 years, and they update it every 2 years just to try to make sure that we're current. In May, what happens in the city of Missoula, our charter dictates that the mayor creates a budget and brings it to City Council for discussion and approval. So the mayor will present his strategic priorities and the budget based on that strategic plan. He'll bring that forward he'll present his strategic priorities. Sorry, there's another step in here that we added kind of last year. So he'll bring strategic priorities, which are just kind of the big picture actions that we want to see. He'll bring those before council in May, and then in June, he'll present his executive budget, which is the actual numbers that are attached to those priorities, and he'll bring that to Missoula City Council. And then from June through August, Missoula City Council has meetings every Wednesday, Committee of the Whole, or Budget Committee. Sorry, we've renamed things a couple of times. They'll be meeting every Wednesday and discussing the budget and all the department requests and figuring out where things go. And then in August, we hold the public hearings on the budget and have a final vote on the budget. We don't receive our taxable values, so all those numbers that that come in from those, property assessments and how much is the entire city worth. We don't receive those numbers from the Department of Revenue until the first Monday in August. And so we don't adopt our budget until mid-August because we don't know what those numbers are. Although our fiscal year actually begins in July. So for the first month and a half, we're waiting to see what happens. So so that's that process. Yes, go ahead.
Is there within state law in Montana, is there a budget committee that is comprised of citizens and council?
No.
No.
No, but all of our budget hearings have to be open to the public. Everything is, in every weekly council meeting that they have here, there's always a public comment period. And then, of course, when we hold the public hearing, that's usually held open for a couple of weeks for folks to come and comment as well. So, yeah.
I'm curious, in Oregon, where I moved from, there's every government entity has a budget committee that is comprised of an equal number of councilors or board members and an equal number of at-large citizens that is a part of that whole budget process. So that's what I was curious.
That's interesting.
Is there any certain reason why the city has to have a fiscal year ending in July and running for a month and some change with no budget approved fiscal year?
Yeah, our fiscal year and the property tax calendar is all statutory.
Yeah. So. And then just a couple more slides to kind of talk about how our demands for service increase over the years. You can see our fire emergency calls just since 2018. In 2018, they got a little over 9,000 calls for service. In 2022, they had 12,500, and that's that's an increase of 39% since 2018, when we've only had a population increase of 13% in that same amount of time.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
At the presentation, when they presented this and discussed it, there were 2 or 3 people that asked the question if the fire department had any explanation why there was such an increase, in the call increase compared to the population increase. And I didn't really feel like it was answered in a meaningful way. So is it possible that they redefined fire emergency calls? I mean, is there a change in definition of what is a call? Or is there, you guys have a better explanation than they have? Because I just didn't feel like it was valid.
Just curious if the demographic of age is on it with that.
That could definitely be a factor. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. We don't have any real good data on. I mean, we have good data on the call increases and the types of calls increases. I think there are a number of factors. I mean, one is that Missoula now gets over 3 million tourists a year. And that is a substantial amount of population that isn't in that population increase that are getting services. Other pieces is that, the fire department is now doing a lot more crisis services, and a lot of those calls are related to that. And, it's not, mental health cuts in Montana have been significant, and that has been a direct impact on our first responders, both police and fire. And that's in here. And then another piece of that, as part of the reaction to that, the city established the mobile support team. You probably learned about that in fire. That is a new service that would increase these emergency calls that would be listed here. Those would not, and they would that would be somewhat of a decrease in police. So that could be some of that too.
One of the firefighters specifically gave that there was a lack of access to healthcare, and so essentially folks were waiting until something became an emergency rather than seeking preventative care. And as that has gotten worse, so has emergency calls.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things that, it has a lot of factors that go into it. And then finally, another example of inflation pressure. Rate of inflation since 2017, 22%. That's a big number, as we all know, because we've all been impacted by that. some of the things here, you know, our street materials, for example, some of those have kept pretty close. Our emulsified asphalt has gone up almost 72% in that amount of time. I did the math on it, and just since 2020, the same amount of asphalt total in all of these categories cost us about $250,000 more since 2020. So these are some of the pressures that we're facing as we're going onto our budget. And with that, I will pop it over to Dale, and I know Gwen wants to go through her stuff as well. So.
Right. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of property tax policy and how the Montana tax system works in relation to some other things. So, so these two charts show the average of all U.S. local governments and where the taxes come from for them, and you can see that property taxes. You know, it's the primary funding mechanism for local governments across the country from taxes, and it's 72%. Montana, it's 96.5% of our taxes, not on that same budget, of tax revenues that the city gets, or all local governments, is 96%. So we don't. What Montana is different than a lot of other states is we don't have other tools. Property taxes is it. What do I do? Do you have a question?
For the taxing breakdown, is that due to local government choice, or is that due to state law?
It's state law. We have to assess taxes within the framework of the state law, you know, and you know there's a recent example is that the Missoula County and partnered with the city of Missoula passed that local option gas tax that was in the law. But the legislature actually overturned that. It was approved by the Missoula County voters. The following legislature repealed that existing law, and you know went retroactively applied it to the Missoula's gas tax. So, yeah.
You know, on the previous slide, it did say individual and corporation tax. I was just trying to figure out, how come we don't have that?
So this is local government, and so we don't get a piece. You know, the cities, so there are other areas in the country, particularly large cities, that have a local option income tax, and they can apply, and so rather than pay property tax, or in addition to property tax, you actually have a tax return that you file with the city.
Yeah. Would you happen to know what percentage of the county's budget goes revenue, how much does the city contribute to that? Like our city taxpayers for over 50% of the county budget, is it 75 or 40?
That's a great question. Can I answer that off the? So I guess a way to think about that is that you think about it in terms of the total mill value between the city and county. And these are going to be round numbers, like this is off the top of my head, but city taxable value contributes about 65% of a countywide mill. So I think that's about the number. And so, you know, and now they have countywide jurisdiction. Most of the county services are done within the city limits and outside the city limits. And so, but when you pay your county tax bill, like 65 cents of a dollar is paid by a city resident for the sheriff's department, for example. So this chart is essentially shows, I think, kind of the fairness of Montana's property tax system today. This shows your taxes as a percentage of income by income levels. And you can see, you know, broken up in 20% increments. And I think one of the things, I mean, the city has been long advocating for our ability to have a local option sales tax as another tool, and actually as a tool of property tax relief. Not only that as reform, and I mentioned the 3 million tourists earlier. I mean, you know that, you know, when we have 23,000 people in Washington Grizzlies Stadium, as the city administrator, all I see is cost related to that. There isn't a benefit to the city government, right, in that. And this is how this translates to that. And you know, sales tax gets knocked because it is regressive, right? It doesn't talk about income. But you look at, so Montana, this is all Montana taxes. So the Montana style sales taxes, which are the blue bars on the left, are much less regressive than the current property tax system. So at the lowest income brackets, you know, 5.3% of your income is going to property taxes and 2% is going to the state sales taxes, which include like state gas tax and those types of things. So it's I mean, it is, and then as you see, as it goes up, you can see that the higher income brackets, property taxes are a much less percentage of the income, and so that's it's not a progressive tax system at all that we have here, and it's kind of fundamentally just broken, I think. The other thing is, for a number of reasons, the tax base, the type of tax base we have underlying the property tax base in Montana is shifting. And these are numbers here are for Missoula, but what's happening over time, and for a number of reasons, I mean, there are tax policy changes at the state government level. I mean, but our economy is fundamentally different. Our property tax system was created in the 70s when it really relied on a lot of large industrial payers. Not even too long ago, you know, Smurfit Stone was the biggest taxpayer in Missoula County. Now the biggest taxpayer in Missoula County is Northwestern Energy. And you know that means that now you're only that they're passing those costs on to all of us as consumers, right? So it's just our tax base is so different now. We don't have these big industrial payers and a lot of commercial activities and industrial activities don't rely on big processes for manufacturing anymore. It's not as real estate and tax and equipment intensive. And so that has what that is doing is shifting tax base to residential properties. And you can see that. This is just from 1999 to 2018, you know, really a fairly short period of time relative to our economy, but you can see that shift in tax base from, you know, is increased. You know, residential was less than half in 1999. Now it's over 60%. You can see some of those changes, like business equipment tax. I mean, part of that is there's less reliance on that, but those primarily is policy decisions made at the legislature and just reducing business equipment taxes. And this is an interesting chart because it's talking about you know, city, how can we have to keep raising mills even though we have all of this building happening around us, right? We are at a time today in particular where it's really accelerating and we're having record, you know, our record building permit growth. And what this chart shows, and I'll try to explain it, is that it shows that our newly taxable value of newly taxable property, which is the state term for essentially new construction and new housing, we aren't getting the taxable value we used to. So that tan bar on the top represents the average newly taxable property tax base that we would get from new construction. That was that average over that period of time. And that includes, you know, some of the times during the Great Recession. I mean, there's some of that carried over into this FY11 to fiscal year 23 that we're in now. But you can see even though we have been growing rapidly, our value of the property we've been getting in that lower brown bar has been less than the previous years. And that's something, you know, we talked about what is Department of Revenue doing. That is, I cannot explain that with tax policy changes or anything else. It's incredibly unusual. Now we had that huge spike in FY20. That was the first year of the new 2-year reappraisal cycle they had, and now it settled back down. But I would expect that brown bar would be increasing because of all the stuff, all the growth that we're seeing, but it hasn't been really translating to much tax base for us for a reason I honestly can't explain. So, but that is a huge challenge, and it's also shows. I mean, you know, one of the benefits from a local government of property taxes is it's pretty steady. But you can see this chart, and each year of our newly taxable property number, it's all over the place. So it is really it is difficult to try to predict what's going to happen with those things.
Just curious, do you guys have any graphs on what revenue the city has brought in on property taxes over the last 10 years?
Not with us, but there's but I mean, so there is a graph available on our website that shows, it's a chart, I guess I should say, but our audited financial statements are on our website, and if you go to the back of that, there are a bunch of trend items on there. And so there are 10-year trends of mill levies, revenues across a bunch of different sectors, and that it's called that. It's in our financial statements. It's called the statistical section, and it's kind of by rule it's stuck in the back, but that's where really the most valuable information out of our financial statements is. So that's where that is. You can see all of those things.
It's so valuable. Why didn't you bring it tonight?
It's a lot of really dry stuff. It's a lot of really dry stuff all the way through, but I'm happy to write down for you how to get there on the website, and we can go over it. It's for those of us who are really nerdy, and if you're nerdy like us, then I'm happy to show you where it is.
I am a nerd when it comes to
Okay, I'll walk you through it.
And so now I'm going to shift to talking about how we compare to other cities in Montana. And I think, well, this is I'm going to talk about it in a couple different ways. I think we collect revenues in typical two ways. I've talked about property taxes, but I always include assessments in that as well. And citywide, we have two citywide districts, the Parks District and the Road District, and along with our traditional property tax mills. And this is what this looks like compared to mills. Now, one thing that Missoula has done with its Road and Park District, it uses the same assessment methodology, taxable value, than the other districts. Most other cities in Montana use a different basis for their citywide districts. It might be lot size or front footage facing a public road, and those, just different assessment methodologies. And so what we've done in order to try to get an apples to apples comparison of mills is take the revenues of all of those and the cities and our peer cities' taxable values, and just convert them. If they were assessed like mills, this is what it would look like. And what this shows is that Missoula is in line with all of the others. Now, if you see our blue, we're that blue bar in the middle. We have the highest mill levies, but we also have the lowest level of special districts in the state. But we're all really similar in that, and we all have to work under the same legal framework. So it makes sense that we're pretty similar. But it's just kind of how we got there is a little bit different, because we're more reliant on our general fund property tax levy than we are special districts that other cities use.
And so this is why when you hear that statement out in the public that Missoula has the highest property taxes in the state, that is technically true, and that is because we have the highest colored bar here. But when you add that assessment and those special districts, that's where it's like, yes, it's true, but it's misleading. And so we like to have that comparison here. This is the full story that is the other side of that kind of half the story that gets out there in the public a lot. So.
Yeah, but Julia.
Yeah, no, that's.
Sorry. No, special districts. So how do you go about getting one of those? Or why do they have more than we do?
So Missoula was actually late to the dance. So these special districts that Missoula has were established in 2010. And most of the other cities had special districts, started really in the 70s is when and street maintenance is the biggest example. We just, the city of Missoula no longer has any street maintenance in its general fund anymore. That's now all supported by the road district. But that just happened in the last couple of years. There is no other major city in Montana that had street maintenance in their general fund. It's just that that's just the way it's grown up, and we just haven't used it. We've always just relied more on property taxes here.
So you don't use special, for example, if you did get all the sidewalks in a particular district, you wouldn't assess that as a special improvement district?
So a special improvement district is a little bit different. So we do those where, and you know, a lot of cities, there's a particular geographical boundary that's smaller that, and that isn't included in here. For this particular analysis, we're only looking at the citywide assessments, and especially just to show that that are essentially a tax on all residents.
And Dale, if I can add, so if it's property taxes for the general fund, or if it's the park district or the road district, it's all right here. It's the number you're paying. So it's coming out of the same pocket. There are different reasons to have a district versus general fund, but it's all here. Not a separate bill, not.
Yeah, and I'm not aware that and no other city actually puts their their special district assessment. They're all on their tax bills as well. It's just a different line. That's not based on the value of your home. So the other piece is that really influences the number of mills and the difference in mills. So like if you just comparing City of Missoula's mill rate to City of Bozeman's mill rate is misleading because the underlying value of the properties are so different. And so what we're trying to do in this chart is trying to correct for that. And trying to say like, well, okay, and maybe do it by we're doing it here per capita, saying, all right, what is the mill levy per capita to make sure, because we get a mill value, right? That is the value of all of the properties in our city, and it's hard to compare that to Billings, which is much bigger, or Helena, which is a lot smaller. So we think, well, let's try to correct that with population and see, and whether that is an apples to apples, I think is honestly debatable, but at least it's an attempt to try to make these comparable. And again, Missoula is kind of right in there. On average taxable value, and what I would expect is, yes, Bozeman per capita has a higher value in property than Missoula does. I would expect that. Their housing prices are much higher and all those things. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, Missoula was really low, and I was talking, it's like, I don't understand why ours would be so low compared to some of our peer cities. But in recent reappraisals, it's been kind of creeping up there. But this is kind of an interesting thing, and I think, and it seems reasonable now. I mean, Helena seems a little bit high compared to the size of it, but it just kind of seemed to make sense. And then this next one is kind of trying to do it all, right? To take we have mills and we have special assessments and it's hard to compare, and we figured one great comparing is we'll just take all of the revenues we get, all of the tax revenues, taxes and assessments, and we'll just divide it by the number of people. Like how much of dollars does the city raise per person in each city? And again, we're just kind of right in the middle of that. So so it's, and again, I think not unsurprising because of the way we are, because we're in the same legal framework. And it'll be interesting to see how this changes over the next couple of years, because I know, Billings just had a big public safety mill levy pass, and so those things might change around a little bit over time as those things change. But it's but that just kind of shows that all of the cities, we're all in the same boat, so we have a similar framework. Though Bozeman, I don't know what they're doing over there, but so. And that was my last slide. So thanks, and happy to have questions and discussion about that. But though Gwen might want to start the.
I think we were supposed to be done 15 minutes ago.
Oh.
So.
No, it's a lot of information, and it's complicated, so it's hard to process, but that was really clear, and thank you. Thanks both, and I'm sure there'll be questions. So the next thing we're going to do is we have our mock budget session. So I gave you all some documents last time. This is a greatly simplified version of our budget, and I have rounded up and I've rounded down to try and make the numbers easy to work with in a short amount of time. And the numbers are not true, so don't be going around Missoula saying, look how much this costs. This is an approximation, okay? But trying to, and our budget is way more complicated, but this is trying to kind of show you the tension of how we make the budget work every year. And I would describe it as a melding of the last 5 or 6 years worth of budgets. I kind of took some things from here, some things from there, and the tension that you'll see is typical. I will tell you the budget that we're going to have this summer is going to be very different and frankly much harder. So I wanted to just work with what we've had in the past. Your staff are the people who are here from staff as well as your city councilors. They are here to answer questions. They cannot advocate one way or the other. But, that's the other 364 days out of the year. No, they're staffed to answer your questions. So if we cut this, what are the ramifications? If we don't honor this new request, what are the ramifications? What does this mean? And, you know, things like that to just help them. I mean, of course, you're going to provide input, but I want to see what you guys come up with, because you've had department presentations from everyone. You have a sense of what the city does and the value, and I want to see how you work with that. We're going to divide up into groups, into 4 groups, and you're going to have about 50 minutes. If you make cuts, you can look at staff, and you can consider one full-time employee at about $100,000 now. Doesn't mean that everybody in the city makes $100,000, but that's an average, and that includes benefits, which are a big chunk that you don't really see up front. So that's just your number to use for cutting. If you raise taxes, it must be done in mills. I have these information sheets that are at the tables. Each mill is $150,000, and I calculated that out for you, so you can, it's easy to work with, and what that translates to in terms of annual tax increase on a $400,000 house. A taxable value $400,000 house, which is probably $550 or $600 in reality. Collective bargaining agreements, you have to honor those. They are contractual. We can't get out of them. You can cut an employee though, but you have to honor contractual bargaining agreements. The cost of living adjustment that I put in there was 3%, which is about an average. I'll get to you in a second. Okay. What else? Okay, there was a housing contribution question. So I believe that is CDBG, federal grants that comes to us, collective, oh gosh, help me with the community development block grants, thanks. I always stumble over that. Federal dollars that come into our community to help with housing. So for example, Bellagio, Trinity, those housing projects. There's a lot of sideboards around how we can use that money, and we plug it in where we can and use every penny that we can. That's what that is, contributions.
That is the attorney as well, for the contributions.
That would be, we get money, federal dollars for crime victim advocates, stuff like that. So it's great, it comes from outside, it is earmarked for certain things. Yeah, can't really cut that, don't want to cut that, because it doesn't impact.
Hey, I thought we were supposed to say anything.
Good point. You can do whatever you want. Whatever. For the purposes of this exercise, though, it's just hard to get into those specifics. Okay, so let's talk about the changes. When you get to your tables, we now have some new information. First of all, tennis courts, the Fort Missoula tennis courts were listed as a cost of $600,000. We inadvertently did not include another $100,000 that was in an account. We charge rent for those tennis courts every year to the local tennis clubs that have tournaments, and also MCPS, our local schools. That money goes into an account. We cover the annual maintenance that has to be done on those out of that account, but we've got $100,000 in there to go towards the tennis court. So now the tennis courts only cost $500,000, and the debt service on that will be $65,000. It's on the pages, so that's you'll see the information there. The other thing is we now have our revenue, actual revenues numbers. Before we had a revenue projection of $1,462,000. Unfortunately, that has been revised down. If you recall, there was discussion about centrally assessed industries, which centrally assessed industry cuts across county lines. So this is not advocating, this is facts from the head of Department of Revenue back in 2018 when I sat through a talk that they gave. It is common business practice that when a lot of the big centrally assessed companies are assessed at new valuation number, they contest it. They appeal it and they contest it and they litigate it with the Department of Revenue, which only has so many resources, and at times they reach a settlement. So unfortunately, they have reached a settlement and now $162,000 less in revenue to the county of Missoula. So now your new revenue number is 1.3 million. Okay, so I think I've covered it. And that's all on the sheets. That's all on the sheets at your table.
Okay, now I'm.
It's all spelled out.
I just
Just
wanted
wanted
I
to
do want to
explain.
reiterate that these are all made-up numbers.
Right.
These are all made up numbers, fabric. Yes.
So, nerded out a little bit and put this number into a spreadsheet with a little bit of calculation for the difference. It's about a $2 million shortfall and about a $2.8 million shortfall fiscal year '23. Was that just due to the averages, or where does that difference then come from if that was the fiscal year from before? And I will say that I may have made a mistake, so.
No, I didn't.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So that's just where I had come to the conclusion for the total.
So the revenue we had in 2023 was, I'm looking at the general fund, 58,500,000. Okay, tax base increase of we were projecting a 1.462 million increase, but we only got 1.3 million. All right. And I'm sorry, I should supplement that, this should be clearer. With the road and park districts, we've got, it's 400,000 in additional revenue. for road and park districts.
So road and
You
park.
understand that?
Combined?
I'm looking at this sheet if this helps you visualize.
Yeah, if they
All right.
combine, 400,000.
Yeah.
No, 200 in each, 200 in each. Okay, so basically, this number that I circled is now 1.3. That's what we got. Okay, and for averaging points, just make the second number for road district, 200,000. All righty, does that simplify it down a little bit? I know, it's a lot to like put in a short time. So,
Two in the deficit situation.
correct, which is not uncommon. That's, yeah, it's not uncommon, it's 70.
So what they're looking at is different than what we were giving, correct? Because we
Well-
do not have all the budgetary.
They've got the additional documents at their table, so they haven't seen those yet.
Okay,
With the
I don't think I've
updates.
seen what's in there.
Yeah, with the updated numbers.
Okay.
Okay. Quick questions.
Yeah, quick question, maybe it's a quick question, but I'm assuming that you're required to have a balanced budget.
Yes. You do have to have a balanced budget. With each mill, you don't have to use the entire mill if you're, but any leftover will go into reserves. You can't live below.
On page one of the homework, it says, there are sections of the city budget where the council does not have the ability to change or exceed. Council, mayor's office, establish orders. You can't do the mayor's office. Alter it.
So that's
Can you repeat what you said?
right. So I want to get into too many details. There's a lot of areas that we can't touch, frankly, but our mayor's office is set up by our city ordinance based on our charter. We gotta change a lot of law if we're gonna really redo the mayor's office. So right now it's staffed and it's basically based on staff. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying, but theoretically, you could put in a budget up. He could, sky's the limit.
He could what? He could add to his budget?
If he can't alter his budget, he could put anything out there he wanted and get away with it.
I'm not following you on that one, but
I
I
kind
think we
of
should
disagree with
get
that, sir, because a lot of things, I can't remember where the threshold is, has to go over, to go to city council for a vote. What is the threshold now?
4,990.
What was it?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so the mayor can't just do what he wants. It does come to city council for a lot of things.
Yeah. So, without further ado, I think we should get to this because I want to put about 15 minutes into this so that everyone can report back in. Okay, and at the end of this whole evening, we do have an evaluation for you guys to hopefully fill out to tell us what you think of the local government academy, how we can, if you think it's worth it, how we can make it better. All right, so I'm going to have you count off by 4, and I think one of our groups will have 5 people, the other 2 will have 4 people. So why don't you start? 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2,
3,
4.
1,
2, 3,
4.
1, 2,
3,
4, 1,
3.
4.
1, 2.
Okay, so we're going to have table 1, table 2 over here in the corner. All right, table 3 where Dale is sitting, and table 4 over here. Okay. So first of all, everybody rolled up their shirt sleeves and you guys are diving in and working hard. And if you have feedback on how to make this budget exercise better or more clearly, you can put it in your evaluation sheet or you can email me tomorrow because we'll try and build on it every year. And it's hard to take all this information and simplify it enough, but create the tensions inherent. So why don't we start with number 1 first? You want to tell everybody what you, I don't know, were you able to reach a conclusion, and in general, what did you do?
Well,
We found out it looked like we had to have at least 31 mills just to honor the original. And then anything else beyond that, we'd have to add more mills, I guess.
yes, and if we didn't add any more mills, we were going to have to decrease the budget by 3%. And we were going to look at the department heads to try to see where they could cut their budget, because I feel like when it comes to department heads, they need to be accountable for their departments, and they need to come, as well as come to you with what they want, they need to come to you with what they can cut.
Yeah.
So we would have to go back to them and have them readjust their stuff to see what they can get.
Yeah, how to be the most constructive.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's like, yeah, I think, I mean, you heard from most of our department heads. You heard them present, and you know how hard they work and what they think about, they value their work. So that it's hard. And it's hard to ask Brian Hensel to cut 3 more snowplows when he's trying to do more with less. But yeah, that is one way, and that's, I'm not sure what happens this summer, but we could be having some cuts possible
Yes.
this summer.
I was talking with the street department the other day, and the amount of extra maintenance that's going on because of a lot of the traffic curbing devices that have been put on the streets make it far more harder to clean the streets. And and then also the bicyclists aren't paying their share of the taxes for all the work that's being done for bike paths, bike lanes, or anything else.
Are the bicyclists paying property taxes?
No, they can't.
Not on bikes.
I remember knocking on doors once when I was campaigning the first time, and one man wanted someone to pay money every time they walked on the sidewalk. I couldn't tell. It was interesting, but okay, well, thank you. That is one way of approaching budget. So we had table number 2. What did you guys wind up with? What did you do?
First and foremost, I think we all, and please from table 2, if you missed something, jump in. First and foremost, tax reform. Being able to look at different ways to bring in revenue other than just the current system that is in place. If you have more money coming in, it's a whole lot easier to spend on everything. Then the second step, realizing, hey, this is the funds that we have currently, is we looked at the additives. What are the things that are important to add, and does it make sense? And some back and forth, let's say with the tennis courts, where is it possible for it to still function, maybe raising the fees for those uses so the people who are utilizing the the space are the ones that are funding it instead of the general taxpayer, and maybe having more tourists and people coming in for those tournaments, as an example. After going through all of the additional line items, then recognizing, hey, these are the additional costs, here's the deficit, and what is the mill to cover the difference. I think that's kind of the overall process. And one thing that screwed with the accounting slightly was with the contributions. And so I'll just note that where those were added as expenses, they should also be included as income. And that's just passed through. So between the city clerk, I believe, and the housing, that's about 10 mils of income that is accounted for through those grant monies. So we were able to increase the mill, I believe, by 3 after, were there some cuts? I was clarifying some of the taxes. So there were some reductions in the spending as well as the additional costs for the asks, and then a slight increase in the mills.
So what did you cut?
That was my question.
We decided on we rejected some new requests that those were value-based, and that was difficult. But for the current budget, we decided that every department would take a haircut, and that came out to about 2.4%.
Okay, so just across the
balance
board,
the budget.
departments have to figure out where they're gonna cut X amount. Okay, all right. And my apologies, you need to make it clearer, and so, yeah, thank you for that. All me, but I think for the most part, it worked, but it's always a challenge to paint the full picture with numbers. But, okay, so you made some cuts. Did you honor any of your requests?
Yes.
What did you honor?
Well, we honored all of them except we were asking the police to reduce their request for Kevlar vests by half. We rejected the new police vehicle. We rejected the tennis courts, and we cut public works and mobility by half. And our understanding is that the new fire station is not in the budget. That is something that would have to go to the people.
Did you decide that it should go to the people?
Yeah, I guess we can discuss that.
Just allow those folks to, the public to vote for themselves.
Okay, all right. Okay, interesting, great. And I can, afterwards, anyone that wants to go next door to the Mar Bar for beer, as we do after the budget, you're welcome to, and I'll tell you the Playfair Park tennis court story.
All right.
Because I didn't really make that one up, so.
And I also want to let you guys know, I don't want to pass this out beforehand because I don't want you to be distracted on anybody else's, their evaluations. So at the end, I will prefer you guys fill these out, and I'll hand them out to you at the end of everybody's presentation.
Yes, and we would really love to have those evaluations.
I would really love for everybody to fill it out. I just don't want to make a mistake. I want everybody to pay attention to everybody.
Okay, anything else group 2 covered? Okay, thank you. Group 3 that was sitting over here. Yes.
So similar to group 2, we discussed tax reform, sales tax, lamented the repealed gas tax. But we began by calculating the deficit, which our math was $4,285,000, and started going through all the projects and deciding which were priorities, the new requests, which were priorities. And we came to the conclusion that we were going to maintain the status quo with our deficit and fund a few new projects with increased mills. So we did 6 mills, and we were able to fund the Johnson Street Shelter, the mobile support team, the IT request, and Meals on Wheels. And we would be saving $40,000 in overtime from IT, so I guess that would decrease the deficit by a little bit, not completely maintaining the status quo. We had a few members of my group who work in nonprofit, and with some of the requests specifically the Kevlar vest, and even Meals on Wheels, we just had the money and decided to allocate it that way. But they kind of thought a lot of that, and the tennis courts could be fundraised, like tennis courts through neighborhoods, or the Kevlar vest through grants. think someone in our group had spoken to someone during their presentation, and they got a new vest from a grant, a federal grant. So we thought we'd leave it to that, and we were definitely gonna let the new fire station go to a vote.
And then you're just gonna keep the deficit?
Yep, we're not making any cuts, we're just gonna keep going.
And raise mills to cover that deficit?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, it's an excellent example of that.
Can you do that? Can you be in the hole?
We cannot be in the hole, we have to balance it.
Well, actually, there is a proper amount of debt that we are allowed to be in. Is that?
I think it's a, well, Dale, we can carry debt on.
Well, I think, we have our definition of balanced budget is, it comes into two ways. There are in two measurements, and it's pretty simple really, but we want to make sure our ongoing revenues match our ongoing expenses, right? So we want, and we build our projections up, we want to make sure that we are on track to not have that cross, though it does cross. It happens, and then we have to make long-term plans to correct that. The other one is how much cash we have in our rainy day fund, our reserve balance, and so we follow that metric and also follow the metric that we are going to meet our cash reserve policy in those two things. And if we have resources above our cash reserve policy, those are things that we would use for one-time items, like the police car in your exercise would be something that we might fund from excess cash.
But I feel like by law, we're supposed to balance it.
Yeah, so the legal definition really is just having enough cash. There isn't a legal requirement that we match our ongoing revenues, so that's just a legal requirement that we have. That we can't go negative in our cash.
So like break even.
Yeah, you have to be able to break even related to your cash policy. Unlike the federal government, who just prints more money.
We carry debt on certain things. For example, if you guys did the tennis courts, we would finance that. So that would be in our debt category. That's what you're talking about.
Oh, I just remember a conversation about 2 years ago, and I was wondering what the percentage amount of debt we were allowed to have.
Yeah, and we typically come in a lot lower than our max that we can carry, but it's for things like that, I think, is my understanding.
Yeah, we have a huge capacity to borrow. We have a very limited capacity to pay it back, so we actually don't have too much.
So basically, we have a great credit score as a city.
That's right, we want that double, AAA bond rating. Okay, great, thank you. And then group 4 over here.
We separated the current level budget, existing services, separate from the new proposals in our discussions. And so the current level budget was about $3 million short. Expenditures exceeded revenues, anticipated revenues. So our options, we felt like would be to either reduce expenditures or raise taxes. We didn't necessarily, or some combination thereof. So with reducing budgets, we did put an emphasis on public safety agencies, maybe taking a less of a hit than all the other departments that are not public safety related overall. So that would be about a 4% reduction in the service agencies and public safety agencies and 5% in the others. Now that would give us about $3.5 million, which is more than what the deficit is, but we wanted to be able to have additional funding to reallocate or to fund a couple of the new proposals that were presented, which would include the mobile support team and Meals on Wheels for the new proposals that we have for ongoing type projects. The OTOs, the one-time onlys, we funded the kept with the $350,000 that is available through good budget performance. We funded the kept RS and the police car. And we, like others, decided to put the fire station on the debt to
Okay. So there's definitely some common themes in how everybody approached this. And question, did every group fund the mobile support team? Were there groups that did not fund it, I guess is a better way of saying it?
We funded
Did you pull on the rifles?
Pretty much.
Okay.
No? What about Operation Shelter? You did not. So the other new requests. And,
The snow plows and the 2 full-time people, we did not.
right, okay.
We split that. We did one snowplow and one FTE.
Partial one. Okay,
Yes, how much?
great. Well, are you guys, was this a good exercise to do?
Yes.
Let's get you thinking about after the several weeks of hearing from all department heads and then kind of pull it together and see what you can do. Thank you very much. And thanks for the, actually, it's really fascinating to see to hear what your thoughts were on all of this. So we also have certificates of participation. I'll come around and give to folks. I'll just call out your name and then I can give it to you. And then you can fill out the evaluation and meet with us. Very much appreciate that. And then, yeah, if anybody wants to go next door.
Hey, Gwen, do you want these back tonight or can we?
If you want to bring them back tomorrow, you can drop them off at City Hall at the CPDI office for me. It's just right 435 Raymond over there. You can go through the Raymond door, walk all the way down.
Camel on here? Camel, right?
Yes.
Can we do this one to do?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you for presenting this.
Yes, thank you so much.